12. Trapped. The day following broke clear, bright and beautiful, and at an early hour a vast crowd was assembled in the great hall of Institute. It was commencement day. That day so dreaded, while at the same time it possesses a strange fascination to everyone who attains the position of a graduate. The examination exercises of the few days past had passed off satisfactorily alike to professor and pupil, and now the last day of all, the great day, had arrived, that was to give to the class of faithful students the honors they had so valiantly battled for, and so bravely won. The orations were delivered, the diplomas given, and each and all had performed his allotted part except the valedictorian. The band in attendance suddenly sent forth a burst of rich triumphant music, as if proclaiming the victory of one who had won the first honors through all his college course, and who now was about to be crowned victor and conqueror. The music ceased, and the crowd sat in almost breathless silence, awaiting the appearance of the hero of the day. He came and bowed low and gracefully, was greeted with a burst of enthusiastic applause, and our friend Robert Ellerton stands before us. He it is, who by hard labor and close application, has borne off the highest prize, who has taken the first place in all his classes, and now stands before an anxiously waiting audience, with the first honor of the day, to deliver the valedictory. It is delivered in the German language, and as his voice rises clear and deep, floating over that vast assembly, and filling every niche and corner of that grand edifice, not a movement is made, not a whisper heard, scarcely a breath drawn, and as the young orator gradually loses himself in his theme, and mounts higher and higher, carrying every listener with him, it seems almost as if the hush of death was on the air, or as if every living, breathing form of a few moments before, had turned to sculptured marble. Oh, what a tribute is such breathless silence to eloquence! Who can ask for more? Who would wish for more? For an hour the thrall was upon them, and when our hero resumed his seat, shout after shout rose up from the throats of the multitude, and rent the air with their bursts of approbation and praise. Handkerchiefs were waved, and hands were clapped, while a few of the more aristocratic of the crowd threw bouquets of choice and fragrant hothouse flowers at his feet. Once he stooped to raise one, and then arose and bowed gracefully in acknowledgement of the tribute. The bouquet that he raised was the loveliest cluster of flowers one ever saw, formed of pure waxen tuberoses and heath. In vain he looked around to see whence the offering came. No one answered his look of inquiry, only his eyes fell upon the flushed and lovely face of a young girl, who was sitting quietly smiling to herself, while her downcast orbs and heightened color, and the tears sparkling upon her long, heavy lashes, told that her very soul had been moved by the glowing eloquence of the young orator. Why did Robert Ellerton's heart leap so suddenly and fiercely within his bosom as his gaze rested upon the fair girl? He bent eagerly forward for a better view of her lovely features. They seemed strangely familiar, strangely like the face of one who had long been cherished and enshrined within the holy of holies of his heart, and he felt almost sure that the elegant floral offering had come from her dainty hand. He cast his eyes again upon the flowers, and started as he saw, coiled between the pure leaves, a little perfumed note. He quivered in every nerve as he drew it quickly from its hiding place, and unfolded it. A cry almost burst from his lips as the words within met his gaze. They were simple, chaste, yet breathing an intense longing for the one to whom they were addressed. "Robbie, I am here, I could not stay away. Oh, come and tell me if I am welcome. Dora. At the Glenben house." For a moment he sat clasping that precious missive, in a trance of motionless delight. He almost feared to move lest he should break the spell. His face was pale as marble, and he could scarcely credit the evidence of his own senses. He feared to raise his eyes lest the vision should have vanished, and he find it all a dream. 80 Poor Robert. Poor Dora. That moment of hesitation was fatal to both. Dora timidly raised her eyes to him, while his were bent in their riveted gaze upon her note, and his pale, cold look, as she interpreted it, struck a chill to her heart, and with a look of deep disappointment upon her lovely face, she turned with a heavy sigh, to obey her aunt, who called for her to go, for the band had ceased its music, and the throng was dispersing. When Robert recovered himself, and sprang eagerly to his feet to seek his darling, he saw her leaving the hall. He curbed his disappointment as best he could, though still clinging fondly to the precious bouquet, and resolving, the moment he was at liberty, to seek her at the Glenben house. Other parties had been present to witness Robert Ellerton's triumph, and a mad jealousy burned within the hearts of both the Ralph Moultons at the well-merited homage he received. Their eyes had greedily devoured the little byplay of the bouquet and the note, and an expression of satisfaction gleamed from Ralph's dark and fiery eyes, as he took in at a single glance the position of affairs, and realized how keen and fierce would be the agony of his rival, ere the day should close. Another still had listened, rapt and spellbound, to the thrilling eloquence of the valedictorian, with a heart that was well-nigh bursting with pride and affection for the noble young man who was his all, his only child. Yes, Mr. Ellerton, having been detained by the breaking of a part of the carriage in which he was traveling, had only arrived just as his son arose from his seat to utter his farewell to those with whom he had spent so pleasantly and so profitably the past 6 years. Mr. Ellerton looked weary and worn, as if he had missed something out of his life during the past 6 years, and was lonely and hungry after a morsel of love. But his thin face lighted up with joy and affection as he feasted his eyes upon the manly beauty of his son. The rolling years had removed every trace of bitterness from his heart, and he was willing to concede everything, could he but once again clasp Robert to his breast. 81 Poor, mistaken father, thou didst commit a grave error when thou didst banish thine only son from thy love and presence. I gaze fondly upon him, as he stands there so noble, and so like one inspired. Revel in his brilliant powers and intellect. Gloat over him with all thy father's fondness, for he is worthy of it. Yet he and thou wilt suffer much of sorrow and misery ere ye shall meet again. And ye little dream that that fond look had nearly been the last. But we will return to Robert. He was eagerly pressing his way through the crowd, when he felt a light touch upon his arm. Looking around, he saw a little fellow neatly and simply dressed, who held a note up to him. Who sent it? He asked, as he took it from the boy. A gentleman with white hair, he respectfully answered, and which was true, for Ralph had cunningly given the note to his uncle to send by the boy. With a beating heart, Robert hastily tore it open, and read the following lines: My dear son, I arrived today, but not in time to see you before the exercises commenced. Come to me at once, for my heart aches to welcome my long-absent boy to my arms. Come quickly to your impatient father. Robert Ellerton. The hotels are all full, so I have been obliged to take up with such accommodations as I can get. The bearer of the note will conduct you to me. When was this note given to you? He asked again, turning to the boy, and with a joyous smile upon his fine face. Just a few minutes since, sir. Which way did the gentleman go? Asked Robert, with a sharp glance over the boy. I will show you, sir, he replied, quickly dropping his eyes before Robert's clear gaze. What is your name? Pursued our hero, who did not like the youngster's looks at all. Hans Weichel, sir. What is your father's name? Hans Weichel, sir? Robert smiled at the boy's concise replies, and said, Well, we will not wait for this crowd to get out, we can go out through the chapel. And turning, they went through another large room, then down some steps, and thus reached the street. 82 The boy led Robert away from the town, down toward the sea, where there were several little cottages in which fishermen lived. They passed these and walked on some distance, before Robert noticed where he was going, so deeply was he engaged in thought, wondering at his darling's unexpected presence that day. At length, on looking up, he saw only the vast expanse of the sea upon one side of him, and on the other great, rocky cliffs, rising high against the sky in somber and majestic grandeur, while behind him, nearly half a mile distant, was the town, and the great buildings of the institute. Turning suddenly to his guide, he said, sternly, "Where are you leading me?" "We are most there," answered the boy, somewhat confusedly. "Just beyond that clump of trees is the house." "Are you sure the gentleman told you to come to this place?" pursued Robert, somewhat suspiciously. "Yes, sir, he said he did not like noise, and wanted to be where he could see the ocean, and be quiet," replied young Hans, with evident truth. Robert knew his father could not bear confusion, and that he loved the sea, though he could not help wondering that he should choose such a very remote abode, and rather an unsafe one, too, for there were reports abroad that a band of smugglers was concealed somewhere about the ledge of rocks, which they were gradually approaching. However, he continued to follow the boy, and soon came in sight of a neat little cottage, painted white, and both quickening their steps, soon arrived before the door. The boy gave 3 sharp raps upon it, and it was immediately opened by a rough-looking man, who bade them enter. Robert's suspicions were now fully aroused, and he demanded if a man by the name of Ellerton was waiting for him there. The man replied that there was, and Robert, with a rather doubtful air, entered. In an instant the door was shut and barred. A heavy hand was laid upon his shoulder, while a pistol covered his heart, and the same rough voice said, "Make the least disturbance, and you are a dead man." "What means this violence, villain?" demanded Robert, thoroughly alarmed. "It means that you are my prisoner." "For what offense?" "Oh, you will know all in good time, my proud youngster," replied Hans Weichel, Sr., with a coarse laugh. "If it is my money or what you want, you are welcome to them, only do not detain me, for my friends are anxiously waiting for me," said Robert, thinking he could bribe the man. "Not quite so fast, my young lark, I care nothing for your purse or baubles, but you are not to see your friends at present." "Why, I demand to know." "Why?" "Oh, because one of your very particular friends forbids it," replied Hans, again laughing disagreeably. "Take that, then, for your insolence, you rascal," shouted Robert, suddenly dealing the man a heavy blow upon the temple. He fell to the floor with a groan, then quick as lightning Robert turned to unfasten the door to escape. Before he could draw the bolt, his arms were pinioned from behind, while at the same moment a heavy cloak was thrown over his head, completely blinding him and smothering his cries. It was done so quietly and quickly that he was amazed, for he had supposed there were no others in the house, though now he heard several voices, but all spoke in low tones. He was borne through the house, then down some steps. And now he heard someone stamp 3 times upon the ground. Immediately there was a grating sound, as if a heavy door was swinging upon its hinges. He was then borne within what seemed to be an underground passage, for he felt the air cool and damp, even through the fold of the heavy cloak, and he shuddered, for he was now convinced that he was in the hands of the smugglers, though for what purpose he could not conceive. He did not know that he had an enemy in all Germany, and the words of the rough brute who met him at the door were a mystery to him. After proceeding through the several passages, and what appeared to be secret doors, he was at length set down, and the cloak removed from his head. A flash of dazzling light blinded him for a moment, but when he opened his eyes again, he looked around him in utter amazement. He found himself in one of the richest and most gorgeous apartments he had ever entered in his life. In fact, the whole room was one bower of beauty and luxury, like unto a very modern palace. At one end of the room stood a magnificent piano, also a harp of gold set with pearls. The ceiling, as our hero glanced above, was dazzling as the sun, from which chandeliers of gold, crystal, and bronze hung suspended. The man who had brought him to this fairy bower had unbound him immediately upon entering, and then disappeared, uttering no word of explanation, neither seeming to have any fear about leaving him alone. He had not finished the inspection of his surroundings when the heavy tapestry suddenly parted near him, and a boy, clad as a page, entered, bearing a silver tray, upon which a most tempting repast was arranged. This he placed upon a small table, and then wheeled it in front of Robert, after which he went and stood behind his chair, waiting to obey his slightest wish. Despite his wonder at this strange adventure, he was very faint, and set himself to eat the savory viands with the keenest relish. There were fragrant coffee and choice wines, and luxurious fruits, which, added to the more substantial viands, made a meal a royal prince might envy. Again the heavy tapestry parted, and a lovely girl, clothed in heavy white silk and gauzy lace, looped with scarlet trimmings, entered, and, seating herself gracefully at the piano, made the grand room echo again and again with the sweetest music. Was he dreaming a fairy dream? Or had some knavish sprite, a puck perchance, bewitched his eyes, that he should see such marvelous sights, and deem them reality? He questioned the page, but he might have been a breathless statue, for all the reply he got was a cold, calm glance from a pair of pale blue eyes. He finished his meal, convinced that the mystery must remain a mystery still, and the page bore away the tray, while at the same time the lovely nymph at the piano glided as noiselessly away as she had come. Soon another page entered, and bade Robert follow him. He could but obey. Besides, his curiosity was excited to explore still farther this underground palace, with its beauteous maidens, secret passages, and elegant appointments. The youth led him through spacious halls, hung like the room he had just left, with tapestry, and lighted by chandeliers of strange forms and devices, until at length stopping, he parted some rich and heavy curtains, and bade our hero enter. The page then turned and disappeared. Robert found himself in a chamber scarcely less elegant than the room he had just left. A luxurious bed stood at one side, and was hung with curtains of white silk, looped with cord and tassels of gold. The room contained everything that the most fastidious could desire, either for comfort or luxury. Books, richly bound, were scattered in profusion upon a marble table, and it being early in the evening, Robert amused himself an hour or two with these, and then retired to rest, and being much fatigued with the efforts of the day, he slept soundly until morning.